September 17th, 1949, 2:30 in the morning, Toronto Harbour, Pier 9, a luxury cruise ship called the SS Noronic, the Queen of the Lakes, is docked for the night with over 500 people sleeping aboard. A passenger named Don Church smells smoke in a corridor on sea deck. He follows it to a locked linen closet. He finds a bellboy named Earnest O'Neil. And Earnest O'Neil makes a decision that will kill 119 people. He does not sound the alarm. He goes to find the keys.
The keys! I need the keys! Steward, open them up!
The burning oath tells the truth about fire, all of it. And sometimes the truth about fire is the story of 8 minutes. 8 minutes between when a bellboy first saw smoke and when the fire alarm was finally sounded. 8 minutes during which the lemon oil-polished mahogany walls of the SS Noronic turned into a furnace and 500 sleeping passengers lost their only warning. The SS Noronic disaster killed 119 people, at minimum. Every single one of them died because of decisions made by the people who were paid and trusted to protect them. This is that story, and it has never been told loudly enough. She was launched on June 2nd, 1913 at Port Arthur, Ontario. 10,000 people watched. A bottle was broken across her bow. A crowd cheered. The SS Noronic, her name a combination of two companies, Northern Navigation and Richelieu and Ontario, was the largest and fastest passenger ship on the Great Lakes at the time of her launch. 362 feet long, 6,000 gross tons, 5 decks, capacity for 600 passengers and 200 crew. She had her own ice plant, her own wireless telegraph system, bandstands, a full restaurant, walls lined with hand-carved mahogany, lounge chairs upholstered in Spanish leather. She was a floating palace, and she would burn for 2.5 hours. On September 14th, 1949, the SS Noronic left Detroit on her final voyage of the season, a 7-day pleasure cruise through Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. It was the last excursion of her 36th year of service. On board, 524 passengers, the vast majority of them American, 171 crew members, all Canadian. The ship made a stop in Cleveland to pick up additional passengers and then headed north through the Welland Canal toward Toronto. She was scheduled to dock overnight on September 16th, continue to Prescott and the Thousand Islands, and then return to Sarnia for the winter. A pleasant late summer cruise, the last voyage the Queen of the Lakes would ever make. The SS Noronic was beautiful. She was also, by modern fire safety standards, a death trap. Her interior walls were lined with polished mahogany and other hardwoods, elegance that made the entire interior of the ship a continuous fuel source. She had no sprinkler system. She had no automatic fire alarm. She had no fire-resisting bulkheads to slow or contain a blaze. Her passenger decks, A, B, C, and D, had no direct access to the dock. Every passenger who needed to escape had to reach E deck, the lowest passenger deck, to access the gangways. And at the time of the fire, only 2 of the 4 gangways were operational. The ship that 524 people were sleeping on that night was built for luxury. It was not built for fire. On the night of September 16th, 1949, most of the crew were ashore in Toronto. Of the 171 crew members aboard the Noronic, a significant number had taken the opportunity of the overnight stop to go into the city. This was normal practice. It was permitted. And it meant that when the fire started at 2:30 in the morning, the ship was operating with a skeleton crew, fewer crew members on duty than the safety standards required. The people who were supposed to be the first line of protection for 524 sleeping passengers were, in considerable numbers, in the bars and restaurants of Toronto. At 2:30 in the morning, passenger Don Church was awake in the sea deck corridor. He smelled smoke. He followed it. He found the source, a locked linen closet. He found bellboy Earnest O'Neil, and O'Neil made the decision that every fire safety protocol in the world says not to make. He did not pull the alarm first. He went to find the keys. He went to find the keys to the closet, while the fire was still behind a locked door. While every passenger on the ship was still asleep, while the alarm was still not sounding, he went to find the keys. The fire alarm on the SS Noronic was finally sounded 8 minutes after Don Church first smelled smoke. 8 minutes. In those 8 minutes, the fire moved from a locked closet to the C-deck corridor, up the stairwell to D-deck, and was already beginning to reach B-deck. In those 8 minutes, the polished mahogany paneling that ran the entire length of every passenger corridor was being consumed. In those 8 minutes, 524 sleeping passengers were not woken up. Not by the crew, not by an alarm, not by anything. They slept while the ship burned. They did not know what was coming. When the fire alarm sounded at 2:38 a.m., someone should have immediately called the Toronto Fire Department. This did not happen. No crew member called the fire department in the crucial first minutes of the blaze. The fire department was not alerted by the ship's crew at all. They were alerted at 2:38 a.m. by people on shore who saw the ship beginning to burn and called it in themselves. Civilians on a Toronto waterfront called the fire department, not the crew of the SS Noronic. The Kellogg Commission inquiry into the disaster would later find this, among many other failures, as a critical contributing factor to the death toll. For most of the 524 passengers sleeping on the SS Noronic, the first warning they received was not an alarm bell. It was screaming in the corridor, or smoke under the door, or the heat becoming unbearable in their cabin. They woke to a ship that was already substantially on fire, with stairwells already blocked by flame, with corridors already filling with smoke. Most of them had not been warned by any crew member. Many of them had no idea where the exits were. They were on vacation. They were not expecting to need this information. What followed was not an orderly evacuation. It was chaos. Survivors would later describe the speed of the fire in language that has never been matched by any official report for its accuracy. "She went up like a paint factory," said one heavily bandaged man. "It just went off like the head of a match," said another. In approximately 20 minutes from the opening of the linen closet, the metal hull of the SS Noronic was glowing white hot. The decks had begun to buckle and collapse onto each other. The beautiful mahogany interior that had made her the queen of the lakes had become the fuel that killed her passengers. The fire moved at a speed that no one on that ship was prepared for. Nobody had trained for it. Nobody had planned for it. Nobody had told the passengers where the exits were. The first rescuer on the scene was not a firefighter. He was not a police officer. He was a 27-year-old man named Donald Williamson who had just finished a late shift at a Goodyear tire plant nearby. As a former lake freighter deckhand, he had wanted to see the Noronic. He knew she was in port. He arrived at the sound of the ship's distress whistle. He saw the fire. He saw people in the water. He saw a large painter's raft floating near the ship's port bow. He pushed it into position, and he began pulling people from the harbour. Donald Williamson had no training, no equipment, no official role. He just started pulling people out of the water. He is among the most important people in this story. Captain William Taylor was among the last crew members to leave the SS Noronic. While members of his crew were abandoning ship and leaving passengers to find their own way out, Taylor ran through the burning corridors, breaking portholes, pulling passengers from their rooms, lowering people by rope to the dock below. He was burned severely on his hands and face. He is documented as having carried an unconscious woman from a smoke-filled passageway and lowered her by rope to rescuers below. Weeks after the fire, he was hailed as a hero. Then the inquiry started, and everything about that night was re-examined. Not every crew member did what Captain Taylor did. The Kellogg Commission documented a damning reality. Some members of the Noronic's crew fled the ship at the first alarm, leaving sleeping passengers behind. This was not a matter of individual moral failure in isolation. It was the product of a system with no fire drills,
The ship was fully ablaze when I got there. Passengers were scrambling onto the dock, and the crew was helpless against the heat.
There wasn't. And some of the people who were paid to protect the passengers used the confusion to protect themselves. The people who could not reach the gangways and could not lower themselves by rope did the only thing left to them. They jumped. From A deck, B deck, C deck, heights of 30, 40, 50 feet above the dock or the water. Some of them jumped into the harbour. Some of them jumped to the dock itself. Some of them were on fire when they jumped. People on the dock watching described it in terms that have never left the people who were there. The sound, the specific sound of people hitting the dock. That sound. Many people went into the water. Toronto Harbour in September is cold. Not life-threatening cold in the short term, but cold enough to impair the ability to swim, cold enough to cause disorientation, cold enough that a person in pajamas with burn injuries has a limited window before the cold becomes a second threat. Some people went into the water intentionally. They jumped to avoid the fire. Some went in accidentally. They fell from ropes or from the ship's side. One person drowned, only one, because Donald Williamson and his raft, and Constable Anderson in the water beside him, were there. The Toronto Fire Department arrived at the Noronic fire beginning around 2:40 a.m., called by civilians, not by the ship's crew. What they arrived to was a ship that was, in the words of the first district chief on scene, a mass of flames from bow to stern. The driver of the first truck, Thomas Benson, described coming down Yonge Street and seeing the ship silhouetted by fire. District Chief Jim Stevens radioed for a second alarm while the truck was still moving. By the time they reached Pier 9, the top 3 decks of the Noronic were fully ablaze. At 7 in the morning, with the fire extinguished and the ship cooled enough to enter, the recovery of bodies began. What firefighters and investigators found inside the burned-out hull of the SS Noronic has been described by everyone who went in that morning in the same terms. There are no good terms. The fire had burned hot enough to incinerate human bodies almost completely. What they found were not corpses. They were skeletons. Many of them were in the corridors, found in pairs, embracing. Some were still in their beds. The heat had melted the glass from every window in the ship. It had warped steel fittings. Only the bow stairwell had survived intact. The bodies, or what remained of them, were taken to the horticultural building at the Canadian National Exhibition, a flower hall, temporarily a morgue. By the time the fire was extinguished at 5 a.m., the SS Noronic was a white-hot shell resting on the bottom of Toronto Harbour in shallow water. 37 fire hoses had poured 1.7 million gallons of water on her. More than 1,000 firefighters, police officers, and civilians had worked the scene. At least 118 people were dead. The actual number has never been precisely established, with some estimates reaching 139, complicated by the alias passengers and the near-total incineration of some remains. All but one of the dead were passengers. The one crew member who died was a woman named Louisa Dustin, the pay mistress of Canada Steamship Lines herself, aboard as a reward for 30 years of service. She survived the fire. She died on Thanksgiving Day of her injuries. The House of Commons ordered an inquiry. The Kellogg Commission, led by Justice R.L. Kellogg of the Supreme Court of Canada, spent months investigating every aspect of the Noronic disaster. Its findings were thorough, specific, and damning. The fire was likely started by a discarded cigarette in the linen closet. No crew member had called the fire department in the critical first minutes. The crew had failed to wake sleeping passengers in a timely manner. The ship's design was fatally flawed. No sprinklers, no fire-resisting bulkheads, no automatic alarm, inadequate exit design. Canada Steamship Lines had allowed a ship that was a fire waiting to happen to carry hundreds of passengers for 36 years. Nobody was charged. Nobody went to prison. The SS Noronic disaster ended something. In its aftermath, new maritime regulations required all passenger ships to have fire-resisting bulkheads, continuous fire patrol systems, automatic fire alarms, sprinkler systems, and trained firefighting personnel aboard. These requirements were real, they were necessary, and they were expensive. So expensive that most of the old wooden interior passenger ships on the Great Lakes could not be economically retrofitted. The ships that had operated the Great Lakes cruise routes were taken out of service. By the late 1960s, Canada Steamship Lines had phased out its remaining passenger ships. The era of Great Lakes luxury cruising was over. Ended by a linen closet and 8 minutes and the absence of an alarm, the survivors of the SS Noronic fire gave testimony to the Kellogg Commission that formed the most complete record of what happened that night from the passenger perspective. Their accounts were specific, detailed, and in complete agreement on the central facts. They received no warning from the crew. The alarm came too late. The corridors were already on fire when they opened their cabin doors. The specific accounts of how they escaped, by rope, by jumping, by fighting their way through smoke.
The fire, it was incredible how fast it moved. She went up like a paint factory.
The Kellogg Commission's recommendations were adopted and became law. All lake-bound passenger vessels were required to have fire-resisting bulkheads, sprinkler systems, automatic alarm systems, continuous fire patrols, trained firefighting personnel aboard. The lessons of the Noronic were written into maritime regulation. They changed the standards for passenger ships on the Great Lakes and influenced maritime safety regulation more broadly. The laws that came from the Noronic fire have, in the 75 years since, prevented disasters that would otherwise have happened.
Before the Noronic, safety was often an afterthought.
The SS Noronic disaster is virtually unknown in the United States, yet most of the 524 passengers aboard were American. Most of the 119 dead were American. American families received the folded notifications, attended the Canadian memorial services, brought their dead home across the border. But the disaster happened in Toronto. It was investigated by Canadian authorities. It was legislated by Canadian Parliament, and it changed Canadian maritime law. America received the dead and sent back the lawsuits. The 1851 Limitation of Liability Act, written to protect 19th century American shipowners, was invoked to limit what the families of American dead could claim. The law that was written before the Civil War was used to limit the compensation of people who died in 1949. The SS Noronic fire proved several things that should not have required 119 deaths to prove. It proved that a ship with no fire detection system, no sprinklers, no fire-resisting interior construction, and a crew that had not been trained or drilled for a fire emergency was not a safe vessel for passengers. It proved that 8 minutes, the time between the fire being discovered and the alarm being sounded, is enough time for a wooden interior ship to reach a state of catastrophic fire involvement. It proved that when crew members abandon their posts and their passengers, people die. All of these things were knowable before September 17, 1949. None of them had been acted upon, because nobody required them to be. 8 minutes. Let that sit with you. 8 minutes between when the smoke was first discovered and when the alarm was sounded. In those 8 minutes, a bellboy went to find keys instead of pulling an alarm. In those 8 minutes, no crew member called the fire department. In those 8 minutes, 524 people remained asleep and unwarned. In those 8 minutes, the mahogany interior of the SS Noronic turned into a furnace. In those 8 minutes, the difference between a fire that kills 119 people and a fire that kills nobody was determined. 8 minutes. Not by the fire, by the people who had the alarm in front of them and did not pull it. The Burning Oath tells you this story because the SS Noronic fire is not just a Canadian maritime disaster. It is a case study in what happens when the systems that are supposed to protect people are allowed to be inadequate until they fail catastrophically. The bellboy who went for the keys instead of the alarm did not cause the disaster alone. He was the last link in a chain that ran from the ship's 1913 construction to the regulatory environment of 1949 that never required her to update her safety standards. One man made one wrong decision at the end of a chain of institutional failures. Understanding the chain matters more than understanding the decision. The Burning Oath covers fires, all kinds of fires, the fires that kill people in burning buildings, the fires that kill firefighters, the fires that destroy neighborhoods, and the fires like the Noronic, the fires that happen because the systems that were supposed to prevent them were allowed to be inadequate, because nobody required them to be better, because it hadn't killed anyone yet. The SS Noronic is among the most important fire stories in North American maritime history. It should be as well known as the Titanic. It is not. You have now heard it. Tell someone.